So this is kind of a part two, if you will. That first session was really more about self-awareness and listening. How can I be more effective in listening, which I think is often the first step of being an effective conflict resolver. This part is going to be more around assertion. So we'll be looking at the differences in communication style, from the differences from a passive, an aggressive, or a passive-aggressive style of communication. So we'll sort of define the two ends of the spectrum, and then what we're aiming for is something a little bit more in between. Then we're also going to be looking at some communication skills that many of you might have come across previously. It is descriptive language and I language, and those are two building blocks for an effective assertion strategy. And then at the end of the session, we'll be looking at a little template that we can use to help prepare ourselves when we're going into have a conversation in which we need to be more assertive in it. How many of you like to be assertive?
Some people don't have a choice.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Are you talking about yourself?
So we're actually, in a second, I'm going to get you to talk more about yourselves with one another around assertion. And then I'm going to look at what is the anger arousal cycle. So what happens when we're feeling like we're now being challenged? And what other people feel like when they feel challenged. So what happens to us mentally and what happens to us biophysically. And then a little refresher on self-management. We won't spend a lot of time there because that was the last class. And then again, looking at that assertive communication. So what I'd like you to do now is just take 3 or 4 minutes and turn to somebody that's close to you and talk about an example or situation where you really felt like you should have said something. You should have probably addressed the situation or the behavior or whatever it was, and you didn't. Okay. So you didn't step into that courageous conversation. What was the consequence, or what are the consequences if it's still going on? And what do you think kept you from stepping in to that conversation? Thank you for engaging so enthusiastically in that conversation. What I'd like to hear from you out of the conversation, what did you notice? What did you share? What did you hear about what keeps you or keeps us from asserting?
Confidence.
Confidence in? Confidence in my perspective?
Previous failures.
Previous failures. Once bitten, twice shy, huh?
Fear that who you would be assertive with is not.
So fear of the other's reactions.
But yeah, you're not quite there.
Okay.
Your job security.
Job security.
Or in my case, freedom security.
So in this case, there was power imbalance.
Power, thank you.
Okay.
Treated differently in a negative way later.
Oh, okay. So retribution. Okay. Good. What else?
Your reputation.
Reputation. I don't want to be seen as a difficult person.
I didn't want to hurt their feelings.
Okay. So either they might feel like I'm criticizing them, right? Okay. What else?
Fear of not being compassionate because somebody might be going through a lot of things in their own life, and you want to be compassionate, but yet something needs to be said.
So, in a way, I'm uncomfortable about it being about me, right? So, what right do I have to to impose upon this other person the difficulties that I'm having. And then not looking compassionate. There was somebody back here was saying.
Respect for the process, so that you think that you're not supposed to say something, or that the parameters around the line, like the conversation, that it's really not yours to say. So
Okay.
you refrain from saying.
It's not my place. And I heard over here, I was raised to believe that if I don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. Right? My wife is from a European culture, and you respect your elders. So if there's something that is bothering you about that relationship with somebody who's more esteemed than you, then you just don't say anything. And then you gripe to your husband afterwards. Okay. There's a big one that I haven't heard yet. Yeah.
Maybe there's a strategic element to it.
Okay.
That there's a bigger issue that
Okay.
you intend to tackle.
Yeah.
And so you may not assert yourself in a particular situation.
Yeah, live for another day.
Maybe it's just not worth it.
Okay, yeah, so it's why die on this hill. How many of you are afraid that if you start into that kind of conversation, you're going to lose control? Maybe that's just my issue. I don't know. But like, I'm not sure how to do this. I'm not sure where the boundaries are. And if I take off that Pandora's box lid, then all of a sudden I'm not in control anymore. How does that resonate for you? It has something to do with emotions for me, right? Something to do with I'm not comfortable entering into this conversation because of the emotional reaction that I might have, or that you might have, or that I might have around your reaction. So for me, emotions play a large part in this. And here, this is a stylized version of what we call the anger arousal cycle. So if there's an event, if there's something that happens for me in my environment, and it can be relatively neutral, it's a triggering event though. It's something that I see or that I witness in my environment, and I have a reaction to it. It could be something as innocuous as my boss coming in, shutting the door behind her, pulling up a chair and saying, "Kent, we have to talk." Okay? Trigger, all of a sudden now, I have a biophysical reaction. Within 7 seconds of that trigger, part of my brain has realized that this is a threat. And the rest of my brain goes into damage control. And I start to say things to myself like, "Oh gosh, this is going to be bad. What did I do this time? Oh, no. I want to be anywhere else but here right now." And then I might start to think, well, what gives her the right to come in here? Oh, what? She doesn't realize everything that I do. And I'm cranking myself up. I'm going up this fight or flight curve. Within 10 seconds of that event, I don't even know what it's about. I am just now stoking my own fire. So there's an event that triggers me, and I start to come up this fight or flight curve. And when we talked about last class that if I'm expecting a fight, then I'm going to behave, or I'm going to react in a combative manner with my body language, with my tone of voice, with the words that I'm using. And my quality of judgment starts to go down. So now I'm not thinking with the prefrontal cortex of my brain, which is the rational risk analysis, logical part of my brain. I'm thinking with my more animalistic brain. And that's not a good place to be when I'm trying to solve problems. So I really need to self-manage first. If I'm going to assert effectively, I need to self-manage first. Because how many of you have heard that term, anger is not a good teacher? Right? If I'm coming at you from a place of anger or reactivity, there's very little chance that I'm going to be skilled at getting my message across to you in a way that you can hear it. So for me, assertion really starts with self-awareness and self-management. Right? And the first thing that I talk about is do not shoot from the lip. Right? If I react and I'm trying to be assertive, even if I'm very skilled at the words that I'm using, I'm still going to come across as aggressive to you because I am in a place of reactivity. So I need to stop. Even if my impulse is to jump in with both feet, I need to think, okay, maybe that's not such a good thing to do because I'm not using the right part of my brain. And I need to relax and breathe. Just start to slow things down. Maybe there's a different way of saying this. Maybe I don't have the whole story here. Or maybe I need to figure out what really is important to me in this situation. I need to reassure myself I can handle this. I can pull myself together, use some skills and some strategy. We talked about strategy a little bit earlier to make sure that this is going to be a useful intervention. And then I need to focus on the issue. Questions or comments on anything so far?
How do you stop?
How do you stop? I stop by breathing. Right? I stop by grounding myself. How many of you do yoga? Okay, so there's some really good breathing and mindfulness exercises in yoga. And it's just, it's a question of resisting that temptation to be sure about what's going on. So when I'm talking about negotiation and conflict resolution in general, I tell people to be less certain. Just be a little bit less certain about what you think is going on, which then drives me into a place of curiosity. So it really is about some pretty fundamental, simple self-management techniques. And then I want to make sure that the intervention I'm going to use has an equal balance between listening and asserting. I use the yin and the yang there because in assertion there's always listening, and listening there's always assertion. We might be using a more aggressive tone, an aggressive stance. And often when people have asserted against us, we felt like, oh, that didn't feel so good. Right? So here's an example of, here's an example of an assertion. This is a little clip that I'm going to show you that's a little bit hard to watch, but just know that nobody was injured in the filming of this.
When we asked Reebok to send us Terry Tate, some people thought we were crazy. But I'm a firm believer in paradigm breaking, outside the box thinking.
Hey, bud.
It was over 15 minutes ago, Mitch! And since Terry's been with us, our productivity has gone up 46%. We're getting more from our employees and better for. You know you need a cover sheet for your TPS reports, Bridget! That ain't new, baby! Hey, Janice! What's really impressed me is how Terry's become part of the Felcher family. He fits right in here. That's a little bit small, Doug. To be honest, I wish Reebok sent us 10 Terry Tates. Well, when it's game time, it's pay time, baby.
Okay. So that, I laugh and my skin crawls at the same time when I watch that clip. Okay, so that, he's probably thinking I'm being assertive, right? Running around, telling people what to do, flatten them if they don't do it. Well, often that's what people think assertion is. You know, I'm just going to get angry enough so that I'm going to go assert with that person. Well, and when we've been asserted on by somebody who's coming from that place of reactivity, it does feel like aggression. So that's over the top, right? That's definitely over the top. Let me come back to this one here. So the other end of the spectrum is passive or powered under. And those people who are avoidant or accommodators will tend to go for this communication style. It's also not very effective. And to see the other end of the spectrum on this one, I'll show you another little clip. It's not quite as violent, per se, although it still has a little bit of energy about it.
A very close call. Could have gone either way. It was right on the line.
Well, Person's not too happy with it, I can tell you that much.
He's beating him like a rented mule.
And the rest just tuning him out.
Boy, where are you trained to take a beating like that? I don't think I could have married Don Hoffman. Would it hurt for you to say that you love me once in a while?
Okay. So he's choosing the powered under approach, right, to communication. He's still communicating there, right? That's communication. What's that saying? It's saying, I am not present in this conversation, right? You are not important enough for me to listen to. So that's what I would call almost a passive-aggressive approach to communication. Also not helpful. Right? It's also not going to get him where he needs to go. So we need to find that place of assertiveness. So aggressive is power over. I am going to bend you to my will. Passiveness is power under. It's, I just hope that eventually you'll cotton on to what's important to me. Until that time, I'm just going to stay silent. Assertiveness is power with. Okay? It's a connection. It's a way for me to advocate for my needs and still be open to hear from you what's important to you in this situation. So how do we do that? Well, it's a lot about honesty. It's about being clear with myself what's important to me in this situation, and then being direct about it. And not beating around the bush or hiding it, hiding the ball. Sometimes I have these conversations with my wife where she says, you know, if I have to tell you what's important, then it's just not worth telling you about it. Like, oh man, you know, that is so hard for me to follow. It's important, but you're not going to tell me about it. Okay, I get it, maybe. And it's also about respect. It's respecting myself and my message, and it's also respecting the relationship. Because if I'm feeling compromised in this relationship with you, whether it's a work relationship, a business relationship, a personal relationship, if I'm feeling compromised, then it's my responsibility to talk about it, to bring it up with you. Because you might not have any idea that my needs aren't being met in this relationship the way it's going now. And then I have to have confidence that I can do it. I need to make sure that I have the skills and the appropriate mindset to carry it out. So assertion for me is about education. If I'm going to advocate for my needs with you, I need to teach you what's important to me. And how many of you have done teaching in the past? Okay, so teaching is an art, right? It's an art, it's a skill. Part of teaching is making sure that we create an environment that is open to that sharing of information. So if I'm going to give you a message, or if I'm going to let you know what's important to me, I want to really make sure that I'm not putting evaluative judgments on you because you failed to live up to what's important to me. It's not your fault that I'm suffering in this situation. So I need to make sure that when I bring it up with you, I don't blame you for it. And being objective, descriptive, and specific in how I communicate with you is going to be very helpful to do that. If I'm asking you to change something, I want to make sure that you can change it. Right? So that I'm not setting unrealistic expectations for us moving forward. And then I want to make sure that I can check it out with you and clarify it with you if you don't understand. So here's a little exercise that's symbolic of this. I'm going to show you a series of patterns that I want you to commit to memory. You're going to have 10 seconds to look at them. You're going to commit them to memory, and then after the screen goes blank, I want you to try and repeat them back to the rest of the group. So just spontaneously, everybody will be talking about what the pattern is that they've tried to memorize. So 10 seconds for this round, starting now. 3, 2, 1, stop. Okay, tell me what you saw. Okay, that's tough, right? 4 lines, yeah, the big picture. That's tough, that's hard to do. Let's try it again. Okay, I'm gonna give you 10 seconds, starting now. Oh, sorry.
Oh, these ones are always numbers, dollar, percentage.
Okay.
You're trying to understand.
the same number of symbols. It's just they're organized, right? And they're clear. So when I go to teach somebody or when I go to assert with somebody, I want to make sure that I'm being as clear and ordered as possible. Again, this is going to take some preparation. Right? So that's another good reason to not just blah into a conversation as soon as I'm struck by something. I need to make sure that I've got it clear myself. How can I expect you to remember something like that if I don't present it to you in a clear and orderly way? Okay. So we need to start with that descriptive language. If I'm saying that there's a situation that's difficult for me, then I need to make sure that I can describe that for you in a way that you can hear it. Descriptive language is objective, it's descriptive, and it's specific. It's moving away from a judgment. It's moving away from an assumption or a generalization in the way I'm talking to you. So here's an example of descriptive language followed by language which is not so helpful. So if I'm going to talk to somebody about something that was difficult for me, for example, a conversation we had earlier, I'll say, when I hear you say things like, quote, I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, so assuming that that's what the person actually said, it's helpful for me to use those specific words. It's not so helpful for me to say, when you treat me like an idiot. Right? Because if the other person wants to argue with you, they'll say, I didn't treat you like an idiot. Right? So this is my interpretation of how I felt. This is actually what was said. So I want to make sure that I'm staying as close to the actual reality as possible and not put my generalization into it. When you overspend the budget, not when you waste money on your pet projects. Okay? You see where I'm getting at here? Our meetings start at 9. You've arrived after 9:15 for the last 3 times. Okay? It's descriptive, it's objective, and it's specific. Not, you're always late and you don't care about the team. So this is the first start for me to be able to communicate in a way that the other person can understand. All of these reinterpretations, things that might come out of my mouth if I'm in that place of reactivity, will do what with the other person?
It'll put them on defense because you're judging.
That's right. They'll feel judged, they'll feel attacked, and why wouldn't they get defensive? It just makes sense that they would, because they're feeling attacked. So the more I can stay descriptive about this, the better off I will be in trying to frame the situation. What I'd like you to do is turn to the second page in this handout called Descriptive Language. And I'd like you to work with your neighbor or the neighbors beside you and just put a little A if it's an assumption-laden statement, a J if it's a judgment, a G if it's a generalization, or if it's a true descriptive statement, I'd like you to put a D next to the statement 1 through 10. So just take 5 minutes or so and do that with your neighbors. What came to mind to you as you were doing this exercise? What was your experience of doing this exercise?
There's patterns.
There are patterns? Yeah. And sometimes we get judging or generalizing mixed up, right? Or they overlap.
Can I ask you?
Yes, please.
We're a wee bit confused around that.
Okay.
Judging is generally a negative connotation.
Or positive.
Like this. Can it be positive?
Sure.
So if somebody says you're judgmental, it's maybe because you're a nice person.
Well, a judgment is simply putting a value on something, right? And so if I say, you're a really excellent manager, that's a judgment. It's just not very descriptive.
But we have a high authority for judges, and judges make major decisions about right and wrong, right? So it can be positive, but we all think of it as negative.
Well, often because we've experienced it as being negative. So if we go through these just very quickly. Number one, I think you're angry that Bob interrupted what you were saying in front of the office. Hey, it's an assumption, right? I'm inside your shoes now, and I'm trying to figure out why you behaved the way you were. Well, because you were angry. So it's an assumption. Your presentation at the meeting was very well done. The staff needs interesting speakers like you. So many speakers are boring. Yeah, it's a generalization, and it's a judgment. Right? It's a bit of both. It's not so important that we either get this right or if it's a G or a J. It's just not descriptive. When we're aiming for descriptive here is really what we're trying to suss out. When you raise your voice while we're talking, I get very anxious. It's descriptive. Yeah, it's descriptive. It's neither good nor bad. I'm not judging you or evaluating you.
It seems like all of the descriptive ones are talking about first person, about yourself, and how you interpret or feel as opposed to what that person is doing.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm speaking from my perspective rather than trying to interpret.
And give specific detail, which hones in on the specific issue.
That's right. Yeah, hones in on a specific behavior or a specific incident. My understanding is that we were to meet here at the office at 3. It's now 4:20 and I have to leave. D. Yeah, it's descriptive. You always have to have the last word. Every time it's the same thing. It's a G. It's a generalization. Every time, all the time, often we get into that generalizing language. Everyone got very uptight when you said that you thought the new business plan is unreasonable. It's a bit of a G and a bit of an A, right? Yeah. Everyone would be G, and the assumption is there as well. I just noticed that you started talking before I finished what I was saying. I get frustrated when that happens because I lose where I was in my thoughts. D. Yep. You're a very effective manager. I really like the way you handle people. It's J. It's J. I mean, as the receiver of that statement, I feel warm and fuzzy. I'm just not sure what it is that I'm doing well. Right? So again, if I'm getting feedback from somebody that is more of a generalization or a judgment, I really want to ask that person specifics. So judgment isn't always a negative thing. It's just not as helpful as being descriptive. You never really wanted Brenda to get the promotion to director. Yeah, assumption. I get confused when I'm told I have until the end of the month to finish the report, and then you ask for the completed document on the 27th. It's descriptive. Yeah, descriptive. Okay. So listen for the kinds of communication that you are party to, that you are witness to. And here, is there assumption and judgment there? Is it descriptive? Sometimes we have to have assumptions and judgments. What's important, though, is that if we're making assumptions or judgments, that we be clear about that we know that we're doing that, and that we check them out with the other person. If I have a judgment, I want to be descriptive as to why I have that judgment. Okay, so I can attach a descriptive statement to help me be more specific, even if I am giving a judgment or making an assumption. So I marry this then with what I call I messages. How many of you have heard of I messages before? Okay. So I messages are very useful, and we saw actually some examples in there. I messages help me own my perspective. I'm speaking from my own point of view here, and I'm not blaming you. It's all about me at this point, right? It's all about me. It also invites you. When I use an I message, I invite you into seeing the world from my perspective. Okay? Simply by telling you what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling, helps you create empathy for me, hopefully. And then it invites you into a problem-solving process. And it allows me to advocate for my needs. And I've used that term a couple of times. It helps me stand up for what's important to me. So here are some examples of I messages. I need some time by myself, okay? And not quit hovering around me. How many of you have heard yourself say something like that? Okay. Me too. I think I might have said that this morning. I'm upset about the condition you left the house in, is my I statement. I mean, it's still laden with emotion and energy. It's not like I'm divorcing myself from my experience here. It's just I'm not being sarcastic about it. I should have known better than to have left you with this responsibility. Right? I want to work this out with you and not, you need to get a grip. Okay? So if I hear myself using those you messages, okay, this is a you message, then I know that I'm in my place of reactivity and my anger is not a good teacher. So I probably need to calm down a little bit more. So you can self-monitor your own communication, and that'll give you a hint as to how effective you're being at managing your own emotional context. So some of you might have noticed that on the flip side of the page you were just working on, there was a you message exercise. I'd like you to repeat this exercise, so changing the you message into an I message. So let's take a look at the first one. You never listen to me. How many of you have heard this being tossed at you from somebody else? Okay? So you never listen to me. How would you change that into an I message?
I feel that you have earplugs in when I speak.
I see your ears, but I think they're painted on. Right? Okay. Close, close. How else? How else would you
I
change
feel
it?
that I'm not being heard.
I feel like I'm not being heard. Yeah, good. So the nice thing about this is I can make an I statement for myself. And if somebody else says, you're not listening to me, then I can actually do an empathic statement and say, it seems like you don't feel like you're being heard. Right? So I can help somebody else also become more assertive, right? By just trying to get through what their I message is, even though they're making it a you message. You make me angry.
I find I get upset when we...
I'm getting upset. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Anybody else have something different for that?
I have an instant reaction with it.
Okay, good.
When you seem to know it all.
Aha. You know, it was really good right up into the end. Really good. I have an instant reaction. That's absolutely spot on because it's the reality. I have an instant reaction when, and then what I want to do is make sure that I'm being descriptive with that, how I finish that sentence. When you take over my work, right? Or when you correct my work before sending it on. Right? Good. I want you to stop bugging me.
I need my space right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I need my space right now. I need to create some distance here. Good. What gives you the right to tell the client our recommendations without me?
I would have appreciated being a part of the conversation with the client.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. Or I'm disappointed I wasn't able to participate. Good.
I feel left out
Yeah.
when you meet with others
Yeah.
without me.
Yeah. Good.
Or I think it's really important that we tell the client our recommendations together.
Okay. In order to. Yeah. Good. You're always late.
I'm on time and you're not.
Okay. I'm on time and you're not? Or, you know, if that's the reality, there's nothing wrong with saying that. Yeah? There's nothing wrong with saying that. I mean, this isn't about being warm and fuzzy. It's about being accurate. So if I'm here, I was here 5 minutes early and you were 5 minutes late. That's an accurate description of the situation. I need to start on time. That's an I statement.
I think too with time stuff, it's easier because it's like black and white. You're either on time or you're not.
Yes.
But a lot of these other things, it's so hard because
It's subjective.
it's subjective.
Yeah, good point. I think you could have done a better job.
I know your skill set could have produced a better product.
Good. Good. Okay. Who else has something different?
I felt the task was left incomplete.
I felt the task was left incomplete. Sure. Good.
I have some suggestions.
Okay, so that's moving forward. Problem solving. I'm disappointed in the outcome. Right? Could be another way of saying that. You should have realized that before you went ahead. This is a tricky one, huh? You should have realized that before you went ahead.
I think the key here is planning.
Okay, nice. What else?
I was hoping you would have talked to me before you proceeded.
Okay, I was hoping that you could have consulted with me.
I'm working on the next one.
I'm surprised that wasn't anticipated. Okay. Good. You need to start sharing the work around here.
I do the downstairs, maybe we do the upstairs.
Going straight to solution. That's what you call a compromise. That's fine. That's fine. So how would you rephrase that into an I statement?
I would like the work to be shared.
Okay, good. I like the work to be shared, or I need to know what I'm responsible for.
I was hoping to have recognition.
Good. I need to be recognized. Excellent. So all of those are valid. What you'll notice is when I start to reframe it into an I statement, the blame and the judgment start to drop away. You statements are inherently blaming and judgmental or assuming, right? And we start to get into that should language, right? And I should all over the place. Yeah.
Also, what comes to mind is nobody can argue with how it makes you feel.
Exactly.
So it kind of diffuses the argumentative point. You're just putting it across.
That's a really key point. You're being disrespectful. Oh, no, I'm not. I've got the utmost respect for you. I'm feeling like I need more respect. No, you don't. Right? Nobody would ever say that. Right? Exactly. Nice point. So finally, there's a way that we can put all of this together in a kind of strategic messaging for the other person, and it's combining descriptive language, it's combining I statements, and it's combining some listening. And we call it the ADIR model. Okay. So it starts with an acknowledgement. So I need to either acknowledge the situation or I need to acknowledge my positive intent. So I want to start off on a positive footing. Acknowledge either the difficulties that we're having, acknowledge the difficulty of the situation, or acknowledge the positive intent. Or maybe even acknowledge what I'm assuming your positive intent is. And then I need to describe that situation. What is it that is difficult for me, using my best descriptive language. Express why it's a problem for me, using an I statement. And then I want to move into more of a shared dialogue. I'm going to ask them, what's your perspective? Or I'm asking them for a change. How do you think we might be able to resolve this? Or ask them for ideas, right? What do you think might be going on? And then land on a positive result, which kind of ties back into the acknowledgement. So let's take a look at this as an example. Here's an example of a situation. You're giving your opinion at a staff meeting. So I'm giving my opinion at a staff meeting. One of my colleagues looks up at me and says, well, it appears that you don't see the importance of what I'm saying here. You know, it looks like you're the only one person in this department. And I decide to approach them afterwards. Okay? So I'm going to start with an acknowledgement. I really want to ensure that we all feel comfortable speaking up in these meetings. Okay? So that's my kind of positive intent here. So that might be my A statement, my acknowledgement. And then I'm going to describe very specifically what happened. When you said, you're not the only one in the department, Okay, so I'm actually using the words that the other person used, being descriptive. I'm going into an I statement. I felt accused. I was embarrassed. I got defensive. Okay, so that's my I, those are my I statements. And then I'll ask, well, so, and what was happening for you? So now I'm moving into more of a listening mode. I'm asking their perspective. Or I'm asking for how we might avoid this situation in the future. How can we avoid this happening in future meetings? And then the result. That way we can share openly what's important to us and why in these meetings, okay? Without getting blaming or defensive.
That's okay as long as when you ask, you get a reasonable response.
Mm-hmm.
If the person says, you know, if you said, how can we avoid this happening? And the person is still mad,
Mm-hmm.
and they say, well, you can just shut up,
Mm-hmm.
There's no result.
Yeah, and I would have to expect that that might come out of the person's mouth, right? Because when I start to assert with them, what are they feeling? Threatened?
And they were already angry.
And they might be already angry, right? So when I start to assert, which often feels like pushing back, right? I can expect that they might get defensive. So I need to manage that defensive. And the first step in managing the defensiveness is A, expecting it, right? I'm going to expect it, so I'm not going to be caught off guard. And B, managing myself. So I really need to go back and manage my own reactivity. And I should actually make the assumption that when I start to assert with them, they are going to feel attacked. Regardless of how descriptive and how eloquent I am with my I messages. It's going to be a natural reaction. I'm just going to stay cool, hang there, get it, I get it. And use positive self-talk to manage myself and not to lose my cool. And then I need to really acknowledge and support the other. Now, I've done my assertion. I need to go into that listening mode. So I need to move to their perspective. I need to do a lot of good listening and empathy building. And then to clarify my intentions, which were my positive intention was to make sure that we can all feel comfortable speaking up in these meetings. So make sure that I've got a really solid grasp on what my intention is, what my positive intention is. Because if they're unclear or if my intention is ambiguous to them and they're feeling stepped on, they're going to interpret that as I'm meaning to step on them, that I'm Terry Tate, the office linebacker. Right? So I need to be extra careful about that. Paraphrase and ask questions, be curious, and then stay focused. Okay, so I need to make sure that I'm finishing my game plan here effectively. That they've heard the message that I want them to hear, and that I've been open to hearing a message from them. But you're right, unfortunately, it never goes like this.